Hello and welcome to the third year of the Women in IT stream at GSE. Today is quite exciting. It's our first session. It's our very first virtual session. And so yeah, this is session 3AB. Please remember to give your feedback at the end. Always very important. There are social media contests running throughout the 2 weeks of GSE. The hashtag is hashtag GSEUKC and the Twitter is at GSEUKC. Mark mentioned in the keynote yesterday that GSE this year is free, but we are asking people, if possible, to use the donate buttons on the agenda and to donate to the charity, which is the NHS Charities Together, which is a phenomenally good cause, particularly in light of the given situation and the fact that we are all remote. I'm coming to you here from Ireland as opposed to being physically with everybody in the UK. And so use the buttons, donate, preferably, give £1 per session or more. For those that donate more than £100, they will be mentioned in our social media. The presentation slides are up on the website and available to be downloaded. However, there is an issue with downloading at present. That will be fixed later on today, I hope. This session will be recorded, as will all of the GSE UK sessions. And feedback is really important. It can be given by scanning the QR code on the presentation that Sharon has put up, or by clicking the give feedback button on the agenda. So I think people have stopped coming in, and I think I've now done my housekeeping bits. So I'm now going to introduce our speaker today is the wonderful Sharon Moore MBE, who is the CTO for Public Sector in IBM UK. She does amazing work with women in technology and has been recognised for it in many different things, particularly by being honoured with the MBE in the Queen's Birthday Honours in 2018 for services to women in technology-based industries. And also has been presented with the Inspirational Women in Leadership Award at the inaugural Scotland Women in Technology Awards in 2017. Sharon is the Deputy Chair of the BCS Women, leads BCS Women activity in Scotland, and is a board member of Scotland Women in Technology. She has found herself in the Computer Weekly Top 50 Women of Influence since 2016, rising to number 18 in 2019. So I'm sure you will be delighted to welcome Sharon with me, and I'm very, very excited to hear her speak. The topic today is treating everybody the same as treating people equally? So Sharon, with that, I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's really excruciating listening to the bio after that's just awful. Anyway, hi everyone, morning. I hope you're all having a great day. I've just spotted that my competition today includes the Mayflower. So maybe some people will watch this on the recording afterwards instead, because I'd possibly be at the Mayflower station too. So anyway, question for you is if treating everyone the same as treating everyone equally. And this came out of some thoughts where I have really well-meaning colleagues and really well-meaning friends who say things like, I don't see a difference in people. And when you hear that a lot at the moment with the whole Black Lives Matter movement, I don't see color. Now, unless you do have a visual impairment, that's nonsense. We all see color and we do notice difference, and we therefore should be thinking about how we treat people differently. But anyway, let me get on into the substance of what I'm going to cover. So how can we make tech great for everyone? By having everyone equally. So we'll think about what equality is. There's the collaborating with men study that I said I would cover as well. Let's go into a little bit about bias and belonging and what that means. Some examples why tech can be great, just to remind us. Maybe some words of encouragement, and then a challenge. What will you do differently? at the end. So let's crack on. This is me in conference mode. I actually popped this in for another session. I thought I would just leave it in case you couldn't see me. So just pretend that's me on the stage with my Kylie Minogue microphone in my ear. Yeah, let's just pretend we're there in person, because I don't know about you, but I'm really beginning to miss meeting people in person. Anyway, so introducing equality. What do we mean? Right, what does equality mean to you? I'd say pop it in the chat, but I can't actually see the chat because of the screen share. So feel free to have a conversation in the chat about it, but I'm afraid I can't add anything there at this point in time. But here are some examples of what people might think. So it might be equal access to promotions. It might be thinking of people getting paid equally. It might be having the same sort of maternity and paternity benefits. It could be equal caring responsibilities in the home. It might even be equal chores at home. Because there was a statistic that I should have written down, that I'm in a study in International Women's Day 2 years ago, that some men had to do something more like 50 minutes more of housework in the home in order to be pulling their weight, shall we say. It is not for me to judge what is right for everybody's home, by the way, and obviously not everybody has a heterosexual relationship as well. But just going with thinking about the majority here, you know, these are some of the things that we might think about as what equality can look like. For some reason, there we go. Oh dear me, can't manage slides today. This is one of the definitions that I think is a really useful one. So equality is about ensuring everybody has an equal opportunity and is not treated differently or discriminated against because of their characteristics. The interesting thing being, though, that we have to think about people differently to not treat them differently. And that was one point I was trying to make a little bit earlier, that we recognize that there's difference, and therefore we have to think about what our actions can be that means that we give everyone equality. So, I want to dive in with a heartfelt message, or start with a heartfelt message before I dive in. There's going to be some commentary here about some of the challenges that women face, but largely because of men. This is not a personal attack at anyone. It's really not. And for all I know, that the men that are engaged here might be hugely supportive, and the women that are engaged might not be. So not all women support women the way we would hope they would, and actually it's likely that more men do than we notice or expect as well. Let's think of it as some general findings that have been found, for want of a better word. So this isn't a personal attack. Having said that, we do all of us need to consider our behaviours and what we're doing from all sorts of diversity perspectives, not necessarily just gender as well. So, you know, there really is something there about all of us having to continually observe ourselves and connect and improve ourselves in a kind of continuous improvement type scenario. So this is not a personal attack on anybody. If you feel uncomfortable, that's probably a good thing, because we all need to feel a little bit uncomfortable in order to have change. So let's actually dive in. So this study that was announced last year, so I spoke about this a little bit last year at an International Women's Days event. There are 7 ways that men can block careers of women. By the way, not necessarily out of meanness, out of badness, out of threat. It could be completely unintentional. It may even be from trying to do good. So the fact is, though, that there are ways that it's happening, and by understanding what they are, we can look at our behaviours and check them. So what are they? Here is the list of 7. So the benevolent sexism one, to begin with, is where men protect women in the workplace. They don't necessarily realise that they're meaning to, but they are. And it can be things like, oh, she's just had children, or just had and I think it's going to be too much for her to take that next role on, or I think she's got some difficulties, which means she's not going to be able to travel, and making assumptions about women without necessarily asking them what they want and what they have the time to do and what they have the space to do as well. So some of that benevolent sexism where we just get looked after. Don't look after us, and we'll do, but ask us what we want. So please don't make assumptions about what a woman might find suitable for their career, or for their aspirations, or for their home life. Talk to them about it first. The next one is double standards, and a few of us will have be familiar with this already. And a few years ago, there was a fantastic advert by, I think it was Always. I can't remember. What I might do is have a little look for it later and find it, see if there's a way to ping. In fact, I'll tweet about it, and then people can have a look at my Twitter if you really want to find it. But that double standards where a man who might work late into the evening is dedicated, but a woman who works late into the evening is selfish because she's not considering her family. A man who might make his opinion known and be direct will be assertive. A woman who does that might be aggressive. And a lot of the features that we look for, our behaviors that we expect with leadership, are those might be more masculine behaviors. And then where a woman exhibits them, we penalize her for it, even though it's the same leadership behaviors that are expected of men. And so we are at the receiving end of double standards too, which is not ideal. So for that, we always have to check our language and how are we describing people, and think about that in a different way. Let's not be too harsh to judge people based on what we think they should be like. Are we not feminine enough and all that kind of thing. And then we get judged more harshly for the strengths. And to be honest, there's a little bit of that overlaps with the double standards. So where a woman can be strong, we still have to prove ourselves maybe twice as much as a man might have to, because it's still not seen as enough, or not good enough, or they haven't demonstrated it often enough, or whatever enough might mean. So we can be judged more harshly for the strengths that we exhibit, particularly if they're being assertive or making our point known. I remember once being on a course myself, and it was about so the title was to do with communication with leaders, but it was much more about how we're communicating, why we're communicating, why we believe what we're doing is the right thing, as opposed to this is a good presentation skill. And one of the things we had to do was to think about how can we get a compelling message across quite quickly. And therefore I did, and I got told I was direct. I was like, but I'm not different to everybody else in the room. I was the only woman in the room, but I'm not different to what everyone else in the room had just done. But because I'm expected to maybe flavor language with, I don't know, what do you think? And is that okay? And how many times do women say sorry, right? We apologize before we've even done something sometimes. So that's we have to think about, are we actually treating everyone? Are we actually criticizing or critiquing, shall we say, everyone in the same way? And then we get excluded from informal social networks. People talk about the boys' club or the old man's club and that kind of thing. And again, it's not necessarily intentional at all, but it has a negative impact on women's careers, because it means that we're not getting exposure to some of those opportunities where people suddenly they start talking about the job. And whether it's the job or the opportunities that might be coming up, if the women are not involved in these social networks, then they don't get the access. So this can be things like on the golf course, for example. And yes, absolutely, there are women who play golf. I would be very wrong to say that they don't, but that can be still a very masculine thing to do, invite the guys around and not necessarily think about inviting the women, for example. But it can be going to the pub. And again, if I think about my own circumstances, I travel, usually, not at the moment, usually travel an awful lot for work. And I was working on a particular project where I discovered about 4 months in that all the guys were going to the pub to watch football on a Wednesday evening. Now, I'm not a big fan of football. I'm really not. Give me rugby, give me cricket, give me golf, give me tennis. Lots of things I'll watch quite happily. Even Formula One, which I used to love, but now it's a little bit more boring because it's just not as exciting. Anyway, they just assumed because I didn't like football, I wouldn't want to go. But I would still have gone, maybe not every week, but I would have gone sometimes in order to be able to just get to know the team a little better, because I think that can help with bonding. But that when a number of work colleagues get together, they're going to talk about work a bit. And this would be my opportunity to get to know people. So I did. I actually invited myself along and I got it. So women, if you find these things are happening, or men who are not invited, by the way, invite yourself along. just do it, just show up, particularly informal things anyway. And to our male colleagues, are you thinking about inviting everybody that potentially you should be? And then lovely, sort of following on, women tend to get less exposure to important senior staff. Now that can be as a result of that social networking side of things, but it can be for other reasons as well. So we tend to find it easier to socialize with and work with people that we think are like us. And that might therefore have the impact, in fact, it does have the impact, that often men will work with men in a company, they might mentor men, they might coach men, they might sponsor men. And so yeah, women need a little bit more of that help as well. It's not that women need help and men don't, it's that the men are getting it and the women are not. So yes, now of course sometimes this is happening. I'm making very broad statements here, you know, so there might be some men here who are going, hang on a second, it's I'm helping all the time, and I suspect that, well, we know that it is happening, but it's not happening enough. Then women don't get credited for their contributions. This again happened to me, and I tell you, I was astonished, because I thought I was a pretty gobby person. I thought I was quite outspoken. I can be quite introverted. I like time on my own, but I'm quite happy to be outspoken in meetings, or rather to voice my opinion. And I was sitting in a board meeting, not the only woman in the room, but one of very few women in the room. And we'd been discussing something that was giving us all concern, and everyone had been kind of discussing the same point, which I did think was a problem, but I had spotted another problem. So I aired that problem. And then about 10 seconds later, a chap, two to my left, repeated what I'd said, slightly different words, but made exactly the same point. And I just sort of sat in silence thinking, oh my goodness, it's just happened to me. I can't believe it's happened to me. So it shows you, I mean, maybe my ego is a little bit too big in it, but I knew it happened. It never happened to me before. So, but that wasn't the worst of it. The worst of it was when about 20 minutes later, we're talking about things, somebody else referred back to the point that he had made. At which point, under my breath, I said, that was my point. And the chair next to me did say, yes, it was, which is great. But unfortunately, he didn't amplify it enough to say that was Sharon's point, actually, or, you know, or something in a, maybe in a friendlier way than that. But yeah, they're women, that happens to women a lot. So, there's a couple of things we can do here. And it doesn't need to be women that do it. But if you are a woman in a meeting with another woman who makes a point, I beg of you to please reinforce her point. Sharon, that was an interesting idea. Can you say a little bit more about that? Or Sharon, that was a really good point. Did you hear that? I hadn't thought about the point Sharon made, you know, find a way to amplify it. Apparently this is something that happened in Obama's early administration as president. So there weren't very many women, and they found that other people were taking their points and making them. And so the women started going to the meetings in twos, at least twos, and they would amplify one another's things. So women, please support other women, and men, please do it too. And actually it makes the world a better place, because if we're listening to what other people say, there will be absolutely men who are sitting there without the confidence, who are not sure about being heard, and they then will get the opportunity to be heard too. So it should make the place, the world, an organization, a team, a meeting, whatever, more inclusive for everybody. And then following that, being interrupted in meetings. And I'm afraid that I have learned to interrupt in meetings in order to get my point across, and I probably do it too much. So I'm trying to do that back. But again, when women speak in meetings, very often men will speak over them, excuse me. And it's just tragic to see. Actually, worse than that, I've heard of some scenarios where women don't even get introduced. And I was at we ran a diversity event early in the year when we were still allowed to meet in person. And a fabulous woman from JP Morgan talked about the fact that she'd gone into this room and everyone was introducing themselves, and they kind of went around the table, and just as it got to her, so imagine the person on her right had introduced themselves, just as she could have said something, the guy on the left introduced himself as if she didn't exist, and then it carried on. And you know, it's just, what? Pardon? And these things still happen. They really do still happen. This wasn't long ago. We're not talking 20 years ago. We're not talking longer than that, 40. I always think the 80s is 20 years ago. So the 80s, those of us who've watched Ashes to Ashes and all this kind of thing, you know, and you expect that sexism, okay, it was far more rife, it was far more prevalent, it was far more obvious. The challenge we have now is it's far less obvious, but it's still happening. So again, please try really hard not to interrupt in meetings. If you recognize that you've interrupted, then perhaps give the person you've interrupted the opportunity to speak after, and so on. And like I say, I've sort of had to learn to interrupt to get my point across. Unfortunately, I think I do it too much, and therefore I'm really aware of it. So if everyone could just be aware, that would be marvelous. So there we go. 7 ways in which women are held back, and hopefully some 7 tips about that. It's really frustrating. And the challenge is all these things they're almost invisible unless you're at the receiving end of them. And if you're at the receiving end of them all the time, it just builds up and it builds up. And the more it builds up, the less welcome, the less included you feel your experiences are. And the less included you are, the more likely you are to walk. And if we want diversity, then we have to have an inclusive environment. And I'm getting ahead of myself. So I wanted to make some more points about equality and the fact that you can't be what you can't see, and why it really is important that we have more diversity. And people have heard this phrase a lot: you can't be what you can't see. And I want to explain why it's really important, because we do need to think about how we support women in the workplace right now, but we obviously need to encourage women or young girls to join tech. I mean, obviously they're all going to pick career. Well, obviously most of them will pick careers. What we want is for them to think that tech is the right career for them, and that they can enjoy it and have a great time in tech. So there is this particular statistic. I've been really poor and not actually put down the reference from where it's from, so I will try and find that from my notes that I'd been making. But 70% of girls say they think differently about their futures after hearing from women role models. When you know another woman has been able to do it, then it gives you more confidence that you can do it yourself. So don't get me wrong, there are always going to be people who do something for the first time, and therefore haven't got the role models, whether they are male or female, or a woman or a man. But by and large, it's the role models that make us think about what we can do. And therefore we need to get women in front of girls. And if we want to have women role models who speak positively about what they do, then they need to feel positive about where they work. So there's opportunity to make a difference here. We just need to make sure that we're creating environments where women are welcome. And then let me just think about that and what women leaders look like. So about 4 weeks ago, I ran this Google image search for CEO. And as you can see, it's pretty much men. There's 1 or 2 women in there, but it's largely men. But I'm a CTO, that's the technology side of things. So I did the same for CTO, and it was worse. And this is why it was worse, because we're not even people, we're charts and we're diagrams. Oh my goodness, so that has to change for a start. Anyway, so what I did was I then filtered that search on faces. And you can see that this is what Google brought up as just the top searches for CTOs. And although there's a woman on the top left as the very first result, if you are able to see, that is Wikipedia. So somebody has very cleverly gone in and put a picture of a woman in to explain what a CTO might do on the Wikipedia entry. So she doesn't even count. Although if she is a CTO, then I do apologize. But you can see it's mostly men. So young people are looking at this, and it's poor for 2 reasons. So one, young women, girls at school, and even in university are looking at this, and is there a role for me? Am I going to be welcome? But also young men are looking at this and going, well, women don't really belong here. It's not really a place for women. Maybe we don't expect them to work in tech. So we're sending some really poor signals with the leadership that we have. So we need to work on this inclusion thing in order to get it to have more diversity, whatever that diversity might mean, actually. So why are we maybe not have quite so many leaders in those women, shall we say, in those CTO positions? And to be fair, I am really focusing on gender diversity here. We are, very few of us are one thing. In fact, nobody is one thing. We intersect with a number of different protected characteristics, shall we say. So whether that is you might be a veteran, it could be that you have a disability, it could be that you're a person of color. We all have many different different characteristics, but I am just focusing mostly on gender here right now. So I wanted to talk a little bit on unconscious bias, because this is something that we all have. We all have it, and may all possess many biases. That doesn't necessarily make us bad people, but it just shows that there's room for improvement in all of us. And these biases have come from years and years of things like, how do we keep ourselves safe? It's the way that our brains can process so much information, and we try and catalog and create patterns and that kind of thing so that it's easier to digest. And that's why we need to just unpick some of it. Thought I'd share some of them. There are loads. There's hundreds of biases, you know, and you can talk about cognitive biases versus other biases. And my goodness, I mean, there's books on the subject. But let's just go with a few. So in fact, I'll just bring them all out. So affinity bias is that thing, that in-group bias, where people that are like us, or where we recruit people that are like us, where we socialize with people that are like us, and so on. But we all know that from an economy perspective, from an innovation perspective, actually diversity brings better results. So I'm not going to examine whether all your friends are men or all your friends are women or they're all white or anything like that. But let's think about the workplace. We're thinking about the workplace. Actually, although it can be harder to do, working with people that are not like us can bring better results. It really can. There's evidence to that. So I'm not just making this up. So we all have to be really careful about those phrases, like maybe when we're recruiting, you know, like, I'm just not sure they'll fit in the team. What does that mean? And why is it their responsibility to fit in and us not to create some kind of environment where they can be welcome and be themselves? So we need to absolutely think about what that kind of affinity in-group bias might be and the impact it has. Then there's confirmation bias, and that's the thing where you get a bit of data and that kind of confirms everything that you knew ever. And, you know, and we're all really good at that with data. What was it they say about, you know, like statistics and, you know, damn stuff, whatever the phrase is, you know, often we can manipulate the data in order for it to tell us what we want it to tell us. Or it might even be the first bit of data that we see, and that becomes the confirmation for everything. And this is why I find things like quotas a wee bit tough. I do think targets are really important, and actually I'm not really all that against quotas when it comes to diversity, but I do know I wouldn't want to be the first woman who was appointed as a result of a quota, because as a woman, if you fail, just like any of the men around the table might fail, but if you fail for whatever reason, there's suddenly all women are doomed, because your failure means that all women would fail that way. I mean, it's absolute nonsense, but it's really also something that we get a lot. So we have to be really careful about not being steered in one particular direction because of one piece of data related to one thing that one woman did, you know, or the fact that there's not that many women in tech. You can immediately go, well, there's not that many women in tech because women are not suited to be in tech. Or, you know, there's lots of things here that people just assume, and therefore we need to really challenge that kind of confirmation bias. Yeah, I could go on. I'll not give more examples. And then the last one's unconscious bias. Right, I would really advocate that everybody gets themselves some unconscious bias training. There is a test, the Harvard Implicit Association test, that you can do. It might not be perfect, but it starts to make you think about really what your biases may or may not be. The problem is that once people have had some training, so they can think they're fixed. And actually, I stole this phrase from somebody who does unconscious bias training, and that thing where you've done the training and therefore you're fixed. No, you've done the training and hopefully now you have some awareness. But actually, you probably should go back and do more training in a period of time, because we all forget an awful lot of what we've been taught once we've left the classroom, even if it's a virtual classroom. So there's get trained on unconscious bias, become aware of what your biases might be, but don't assume that you're done once you've had a course. It's continuous improvement for all of us, and I do mean for all of us. I'm going to tell a story that is actually the person whose slide that I stole, because I think it's a wonderful story. So this is somebody, she has been doing many years of training on unconscious bias, as well as other things, but that she's run a lot of unconscious bias sessions for organizations. And she had her boiler break one day, and because it broke, obviously she had to stay in the morning and arrange for the plumber to come out, and she got a phone call, and there was a woman who said, just to let you know, the plumber will be with you in 20 minutes. Well, like, great, fab. When she opened the door, it happened to be that the woman who'd been on the end of the phone was actually her plumber. But she had assumed that because she was a woman, she was probably in the call center, and that her plumber slash engineer would have been a man. At which point her heart sank, like, oh no, I've just done what I tell people they shouldn't do. Hugely apologized. I think she fed her lots of cookies and cupcakes and all that kind of thing. And the woman, the woman engineer said, look, don't worry about it. I think it's lovely that you realized you made a mistake, and at least you let me in. Because she finds that some people wouldn't let her in because as a woman, they didn't think she could be qualified to be an engineer. So anyway, but the story there is much more about the fact that somebody who's talking about this day in and day out can still make those mistakes. So we still do it. The point is to learn from it. And this is that'll be a really good one. It's not actually about it's not about gender. So 58% of the Fortune 500 CEOs are 6 foot tall or higher, yet only 14% of the male population are that height. And I can tell you that not that much of the female population is that height either. So we're automatically assuming that people who are tall are more powerful, that they're more authoritative, that they can get the job done, that they've got better leadership skills because they might have an extra few inches over somebody else. And isn't that insane? That's what we're doing. We're giving people power, even if they might not actually be all that capable of the job. And let's not talk about the US elections. So anyway, let's go into, just because I've talked about some of these things, I thought I'd mention some definitions, and I'm going to crack on more quickly because I've realized I really labored on some points. So diversity is a state of being diverse, just difference, visible difference. I was going to say emotional, actually, yeah, emotional differences, but also societal differences. So that could be, there's maybe, do we have enough people who are working class, for example, who might have a completely different perspective from the ones who are more entitled or more privileged, and so on. Equality is having those equality in terms of rights and opportunities, but then the inclusion is how you feel and how you are actually included and welcome within a group. And Catalyst, are a great organization. I would recommend having a read there, but catalyst.org, they talk about inclusion being that balance of being able to feel like you belong in a team, but you're also celebrated for being unique and why you're different. And I used to love being one of the guys. I thought it was a real compliment. And in some ways, it's not necessarily an insult. But and actually, I felt that made me more unique as a woman because it was more like a guy. Now I kind of say, well, actually, maybe what's good about me being in a team of all men is that I am not the same as all the men. Although I'm very fortunate to work in a much more diverse team at this point in time. And I wanted to then step onto the power of networks, just because of that belonging thing, particularly if you're a woman that works in a team and you're the only woman. In fact, it might be that you work in an office and you're the only woman, or you're the only tech woman. Maybe the other woman is the person on the reception or something, those kind of scenarios. And I just wanted to say networks are a really brilliant place to be able to find your tribe. So there are many. I just pulled up some examples of the ones that we have in the UK here. Obviously, a nod to a couple that I'm a part of. There are lots of places to go to find women who might be like you, because actually sometimes that in-group bias can help us feel like we're not the only women in tech. So I would suggest finding a network. Guys, I would suggest attending some of the events. Now, some of them will have safe spaces where actually that's really only supposed to be for women, to allow women to share some challenges that they find that they wouldn't want to articulate with men present. But actually most of these networks will have at least some, if not all of their events completely open to men, so that men can partake of whatever advice or expertise or whatever is being shared. And if you're the only man in a room, well, tough, because we are often the only woman in the room, so you'll know exactly what it feels like, except you probably still got a whole lot more power than we might have when we're in the room on our own. Tech's great, we do some great stuff, and I feel like I've been really laboring on the things that we need to do better and why we're not good enough, and I just wanted to remind us of tech is great. With technology, we are really addressing some of dire problems like trafficking in the UK and globally. So tech, banks, agencies, a number of organizations working together to stop what is a really dreadful problem and just should not be happening. NHS really close to many of our hearts right now. You know, we're using tech to be able to, well, it says here, maximize patient outcomes with NHS blood and transplant, sorry, because they were basically managing transplant scenarios using paper, and it takes forever to get policies updated if you're using kind of old processes that are paper based. By bringing in basically some BPM type technology, we're able to make this far better for the surgeons, but also far better experience for the patients. And then for anyone who likes a bit of fun, and I expect anyone who knows IBM, you know that we're really close with Wimbledon. Fabulous event every year. We did our best to try and make it a good event this year with fabulous event with Wimbledon this year, even though people couldn't get together. So there was an awful lot that was done. And we're using AI to be able to look for the best shots to serve up as, or the best moments to serve up, forgive the pun, the best moments to include in the highlights of the day, and we're using AI to do that, and we're trying to make sure that we don't have any bias in that AI. So you could say, well, what's a great moment? A great moment is one where there is a huge amount of applause. But what if the great moment happened on court number 12? With two folks who are far down in the seed system, but actually there was an amazing moment for one of them. But because there's a smaller crowd, the applause isn't going to be as much as it might be in center court or in court number one and so on, or number one court, never say that the right way around. So we're using AI, but we're also using the frameworks to make sure that we're not building bias into that AI. And so it's great. We can do some great fun things. I said I would put in some words of encouragement. I thought of maybe some lessons I've learned. I think these are probably targeted more at the women, but again, not every man is the one kind of guy who put themselves forward for everything, who asks for a pay rise all the time, and all these kind of behaviors that we think that men typically exhibit. So hopefully these will help. Far too much stock is placed in confidence. I'm just going to say that right now. You know, where we think nobody is confident all the time. Nobody is confident all the time. Some people appear to be confident all the time. So my plea, particularly to women who don't feel confident, is have the courage. It's not about having confidence. It's about having courage to be able to try something, to do something for the first time, maybe the second or third time, because you're still learning. I was on a course recently where they talk about everything being a practice, absolutely everything being a practice. And I think that's a great way to look on things. So please have some courage. Don't throw away that confidence thing. Think about your competence. Think about what you're good at. Think about why you have an opinion. You've got maybe a great story, a piece of a useful experience that you can share. Focus on your courage. Have a vision. Life is too short to faff around. I'm doing a little bit of faffing at the moment right now, if I'm honest, but largely have a vision of where you want to go so that you can have people help you get there, whatever that might be. And your vision might change. Life circumstances happen, technology changes, you never know. But so you can adjust your vision. It's not a permanent thing, but at least have one. And then be yourself. Everyone else is taken. It's such a cliche now, but it's so true. And if you're trying to be like men, then you lose the uniqueness of your diversity. So try, be yourself. And for all of us, we have to make sure we create environments for everybody to feel like they can be themselves. They should be able to bring their whole selves to work. So is treating everyone the same as treating everyone equally? My goodness, you're going to really need a break from me. I've talked so much. No, treating everyone the same is not the same as treating everyone equally. I want you to think about what you'll do differently. And I've got 3 very high level suggestions of what you can do differently. Educate yourselves on diversity, why it's important, of what it means, what's happening to people, what the impact of not having diversity, and not the impact is of not being inclusive. Educate yourself on unconscious bias. If you're a guy, become an ally. Help us out. Don't do it for us, do things with us, become a voice for us. Amplify the things that we're saying, amplify the need for diversity and inclusion. 3, build equitable practices. People talk about policies, but we actually need practices that we need people to do things, not just read about things. So whether that is making sure that women and men get the same sort of feedback. And I don't mean that you tell everyone the feedback you would have given me. What I mean is women are very often get ambiguous feedback. Men often get feedback that is far more related to outcomes and measures and business goals and so on. So think about things like that. But equitable practices go into flexible working. It could be pay, putting people forward for opportunity, and so on. There's a really long list there. But you can, again, if you educate yourself, you become familiar with what those might be. And I really am going to stop now. That's how to get a hold of me. If I find that video later about how men and women are perceived differently for doing the same things, I will shove it on Twitter. And I'm going to stop. I think this is how you submit your feedback if it's working. So do use that QR code, and hopefully there's some questions. I'll remind you about that as well. How about I stop the share for now, and then I'll have a look. Have we questions?
We do. Thank you very much, Sharon. That was absolutely fascinating, as I knew it would be. So Alison Stewart has had a question, and Alison, I'm going to unmute you and then you can ask your question. I've just clicked the ask to unmute.
Can you hear me okay?
You can.
Perfect. No, I just wondered, networking is definitely where I'm falling down. I used to be good at it, and I think I've just lost my confidence and the time to do it. But I'm a people manager, so my role is that as a people manager, but I'm non-technical, but I manage a very technical team, and I'm never really sure. I guess I'm looking for if anyone has any recommendations of some good external networking I could join.
Where are you, Alison? Do you mind me asking?
Oh yes, sorry, I'm in Scotland. Yeah,
you are, because you've got the accent, but it doesn't mean that you're there. I would recommend following Sweat. So follow Sweat on Twitter. In fact, I'll pop it in the stuff in here. So Sweat is Scotland Women in Technology. And that was established a few years ago, and it's a really good environment. Obviously, everything's virtual at the moment, but it's a great place to find other women. And not everyone's doing a technical role. We've got people in the board who are marketing and I can't remember. But we've got a variety of roles, so not everyone is doing a tech job, but everyone will have some technology. Far too many times, and I hope you're not guilty of this, Alison. Well, I'm not technical. If you work in a tech organisation, you've got some understanding of tech, right? So you'll have some technical acumen. Doesn't mean you're doing a tech job, but anyway. I get a lecture about that. Sorry, you didn't deserve that. That's not fair.
It's very true though. So
definitely follow follow Sweat and BCS Women. So we do loads of stuff in Scotland. Well, actually, a third of the UK activity happens in Scotland because we're quite passionate bunch about making things happen. And again, everyone's welcome to the things that we do. We tend to tag them open to all, built with women in mind, so that chances are we actually don't have that many sessions on diversity, but we'll do leadership talks, we'll do soft skills if skills are soft, but you know what I mean. Sometimes it's tech talks. We talked about ethics in our last one. We'll usually try and have women doing the majority of the presenting or the panel, that kind of thing, but guys are welcome along. So those are a couple of things that are quite broad. There are some networks in Scotland that are far more niche. So there's like Pie Ladies, or Women of Code is really for targeted at developers and that kind of thing, or Women Who Code rather. So, but those two might be useful ones. They won't be the only ones. Girl Geeks is another. Girl Geeks is the one that's quite broad. A lot of entrepreneurs tend to mingle in the Girl Geeks environment, just because it came out through creative entrepreneurs. Actually, is kind of how it was built in Scotland. So those are three. And when we are allowed to do things face to face, if there's nothing near you, it's probably not because we don't want to do something. It's more down to volunteer time. If we know there's demand for doing something close to where you are, then we will do something, even if there's only going to be 5 people who go.
Okay. So thank you very much.
Pleasure. And also, and I would just say that make it part of your objectives for your personal development. That helps you free up time to go, and also find a friend to take along. If you're a bit and network can be, I love all these things, right? But I still find networking really hard, and I find it far easier after an event, because then you can ask people what they thought about what they've just listened to. But before, I kind of turn up and I'm kind of like, oh, a bit shell shocked, you know. And I've done these things for years. So I'd say take a friend, even if it's a friend who's not all that interested in the subject, and just tell them you'll buy them wine or chocolate or whatever it is afterwards that would make them go. So yeah, totally bribery, something like that. So that's my advice to anyone and everyone, actually. If you find networking hard, make it part of your personal objectives, or your career objectives or whatever, so that your manager can support you for getting it done. And also, yeah, take a friend.
Lovely. No, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Thanks, Alison. So we've got another question here from Rohit saying, are there any upcoming soft skills in Ireland, any upcoming sessions on soft skills in Ireland?
No idea.
So there's Women in IT in Ireland, WITS Ireland, and they, at the moment, everything they're doing is on Zoom. There's also a lot of the larger companies do training here and there. So there is, but you'd need to go look for it. I don't know of any off the top of my head though.
Yeah, and if it doesn't have to be in Ireland because we can't meet face to face, actually, we're just announced today an event on the 17th or 18th of November, 17th of November on resiliency. So I don't know if you think of that as a soft skill you might find useful, but that's, everyone will be welcome to that. That's BCS Women on resiliency. So join us virtually in, well, I was going to say in Scotland, but those of us who are running it are in Scotland, in Edinburgh and Glasgow. The person who's speaking is from London. So yeah, everyone's welcome.
Excellent, thank you very much. I'm not seeing any other questions coming in through the chat. And I'm not seeing, let's see if I do this, people can technically put your hand up. I don't know if when I go to gallery, do I make everyone gallery? I'm only seeing the three of us. So that's
it. No hands up. Man, okay. You're all giving me a really easy time.
You're getting a really, really easy time. I thought what you had to say, I'd like to know a bit more about that Harvard bias training.
Yes.
That you were talking about. Did you have a link for that? You were saying
yes, it's in the chart. It is in the chart, but it's called the implicit association test. Yeah. And it's, you know, some people have criticized it, and you know, I found it a wee bit frustrating, because when I did it on one particular characteristic, I felt like I could observe what people would think as one thing and what people would think as another, but I wouldn't necessarily employ anyone based on just because I think somebody thinks they are this or they are that. So but it's worthwhile doing, just to kind of raise some awareness. So that's the link in the chat for anyone who wants to have a look.
Fantastic, thank you very much for that. Yeah, I also love the fact that you use Oscar Wilde quotes. That makes me so happy.
Oh, absolutely, it's got to be done. Actually, I have, it's completely diverging here now. I went to theatre many years ago in Dublin, and it was Oscar Wilde's The Importance of Being Earnest, and it was fabulous. It was all men, and it was just it was so funny. Anyway, total distraction, but there we go.
Okay, how do you deal with any bias you've experienced personally? That comes from Beth. Oh, sorry, Beth, I should have unmuted you to let you ask your question.
Yeah, that it depends. It really depends. So depending on who I'm with, I might just say something. Yeah, sometimes I'll just say something. Sometimes it will be I'll have a quiet word afterwards, depending on who it was. If it's something I feel like I can't deal with, I will then maybe ask a manager or somebody else to deal with as well. So I did have that fairly recently, and I just and I think there was a lot of people. It unfortunately happened in a Slack channel, and it wasn't a good experience. And unfortunately, everyone that I spoke to afterwards was like, "Oh yeah, that was awful," and I was like, "Well, why didn't anyone step in?" Because it was clear that my point was not being understood, or it wasn't being received, because I think everyone else that saw it understood it. Nobody had stepped in, and I was really sad that nobody had stepped in, even just to say, let's just leave it for now, or just let's stop it, you know. And the person that I was having the discussion with, it likes to have the last word, and I really didn't want them to have the last word, because I felt that they'd have won. But it got to the point where they did have the last word, because it was not good to just carry on. So that was a wee bit disappointing. But often it'll be, if I know the people well and I know it's come from a good, maybe they've said something that's they've just not thought about and it's not been malicious, then I will probably say something either there and then or afterwards, or I'll ask a friend or a manager or somebody to do it. The other one is I'll maybe step in for other people as well. Sometimes if I spot bias that they weren't expecting, or maybe some other sexist behaviour, but that was potentially unintentional. I had a meeting with a client, and an IBMer in the room said, it's like, I'm not like women, I can't multitask, so I'll just, and I was like, right, hang on a second, let's just get these out the way, because I am a woman and I cannot multitask, and that is really not, you know, let's just not make assumptions about everybody in this particular scenario. And that one in particular really annoys me, because if I try and multitask, I'm just useless. Apart from maybe in the kitchen, if I wash the dishes at the same time as cooking the meal, you know, I find multitasking is, I just don't get anything done well. And I know I'm not the only one. So it just depends on what you're trying to do. That was a really long-winded way of answering a question. Hopefully that was the right thing, Beth. Feel free to come off mute and give me trouble.
Unfortunately, her mic isn't working.
Oh, well, there we go then.
But I think you did come up with good examples, and so I think that was a pretty good answer. A pretty broad topic, and also the kind of thing that you could actually do a whole session on, things that have happened. Yes. So we're actually coming up to 25 past now, so we should be. It's. If there's no more questions coming in that are blatantly obvious, I've loads more things I could ask, but since other people aren't coming in with questions and it is kind of nearly time to wrap up, I'll say thank you very much, Sharon. That was absolutely fascinating, and it was really useful. I think that there's an awful lot of learning to be taken out of what you had to say today, and some really good things that we can bring into what we do ourselves. Just being aware of who's around us and how we treat them, and keeping an eye on how other people are being treated to make sure that everybody is included. So thank you for that. Everybody else, feedback is really, really important. So please do give your feedback to the session. The session length question is always 1 to 9. 5 actually means the session was the right size, was the right length. All of the rest of them, 9 is awesome. And it's really, really good to get some feedback on what you thought of A, the speaker, and B, the session, and what we have going on. And if you have ideas for next year, please feel free to reach out to us and to talk to us about that. So our next sessions for the WIT stream are tomorrow morning. We have our panel discussion at 9 o'clock in the morning. And then we have our creative visualization on our guided visualization on creative thinking at 10:30 with the wonderful Resley Costabel, which will be fascinating. So I mentioned earlier on to donate to the charity if you can. That would be absolutely fantastic. Thank you all so much for being here. And with that, I think we're done.
Thank you ever so much for the time. Really appreciate it. Do you want me to put the chart back up very quickly if anyone wants the QR code?
Yeah, that'd be really good actually. Yes, please.
Let me just do that.
We'll give everyone a minute to.
There we go. And
there's some nice things coming in the chat saying thank you from Rohit, and thank you from Beth, and thank you from Alison and Valerie. So it's really nice.
Nice. Thanks everyone. Thank you for listening to me, for putting up for me for so long. That's a long time to speak. Should never give me an hour session. That's just crazy. Lesson learned.
We could do. There are more Angie, Judith Lee. So it's great. So with that, I shall close the meeting. So thank you so much.
Have a great conference, everybody. Have fun.
Thank you. Best of luck.
Bye.